Hello and welcome, everybody. Hey, this is an exciting day. This is the first day of our Sutra Studies program. Today's Saturday. We're going to be doing this class every Saturday forever. We're just going to keep going. And good to see you, Yoli. Glad you made it. So for today, I thought we would just do a little bit of an orientation to get everybody on the same page. Um, I think everybody read on the website kind of the basics of what we're doing. Our thought was we haven't done a program like this before. So what's exciting is we love to work on ideas and programs as a Sangha together and figure out how things best work. So the idea was to do the sutra studies like a book club where we give out a little bit of reading material, and then we just get together as friends and talk about it and see if we can illuminate the text a bit. And everybody's welcome to participate. I'm very fortunate because I have a very brilliant Sangha. So the great thing about it is we get a little bit of information from everybody, and it makes it great fun. And I thought about having our meditation instructors do the reading of the text each week, and so that'll be really fun. So with that said, I wanted to just today talk a little bit about what sutras are and what we're going to be studying. So we begin with learning a little bit about the Buddhist canon. And the Buddhist canon is referred to as the Tripitaka. The word tree in Hindi and Sanskrit and Pali mean three, the number three. And Pitaka is the word for basket. In fact, today in Hindi, it's still the word for basket. So the Buddhist canon or Tripitaka is referred to as the three baskets or collections. And we know that today as the Buddhist canon. In this program, and in general with SBT, we like to stay away from technical elaborations. We try to stick with English terminology without getting deeply into Pali, Sanskrit, or Tibetan terms. I come from a Sanskrit lineage, so I'm familiar with more of the Sanskrit and Tibetan terminology, where other members of our Sangha might be coming more from the Theravada or Pali tradition and might know the Pali terms. So to make it easier on everyone, I like to try to stick to as much English terminology as we possibly can. And I also like the idea of not overly intellectualizing a lot of this material. SBT likes to have a simple approach to things so everybody can understand and participate. And I often think that well, if we stick to more of the basics and more of the simple understandings of things, they're often much easier to practice and work out to be more fruitful in our practice. So the Buddhist canon again is called the Tripitaka. You might notice that in Pali and Sanskrit, a lot of the terminology is the same. And the only difference is that Sanskrit likes to sneak in the letter R in a lot of its words. So in Pali, we have sutta, and in Sanskrit, we have sutra. And or you have Tipitaka or Tripitaka. And this happens a lot. I had a friend from the Theravada tradition when we were working together. He told me it just drove him crazy that I would use these Sanskrit pronunciations, but I'm afraid that's my schooling. So so that'll be something we'll have to just deal with throughout the program. I think we'll kind of go back and forth between them, anyways. With that said, so the Buddhist canon is divided up in today's Buddhist canon is divided up into three baskets or collections, and I think I have a I think I have an image for us. And I hope that that fits on everybody's screen. I'll make this image available on our social media. I found this online. This is actually an outline of the Burmese Buddhist canon or Tripitaka, which very, very little difference between them all. But at the top here, you see we have the Tripitaka, the Buddhist canon. And then we have the three baskets, which is the first one is Vinaya. And Pitaka again means basket or collection. So we have Vinaya, we have Sutra, and we have Abhidharma. And this is a really nice representation of exactly what those are. So Vinaya is the training in monastic discipline, vows, and rules of conduct. Many people believe that Vinaya is merely monastic discipline, and that's incorrect. Vinaya is all of the rules of training, also for lay people as well. So it's much more than just monastic discipline. In general, it's just Buddhist discipline. It's how to live a good life, how to act properly, and all of our vows are within Vinaya. So our second basket is the Sutra basket, which is what this class is going to be focused on. So the Sutta or Sutra Pitaka is the discourses of the Buddha. And you could think about that as the actual words of the Buddha himself and early great masters. So it's not just the Buddha, but there's many, many passages of the Buddha's students putting forth ideas, and oftentimes the Buddha gives a stamp of approval. Oftentimes the Buddha will ask questions to his students, and the students give answers, and of course other great masters as well. But generally we think about the sutras as the words of the Buddha, and most of the time they're in verse form, and that's what we're going to be focusing on in this program. And then thirdly, we have the Abhidharma, which literally means the study of Dharma. Most traditions posit that the Abhidharma and the three baskets all generated at the same time, at the same place, all the words of or the works of the Buddha. But later historians are pretty certain that the Abhidharma was written hundreds of years after the Buddha passed away. But what the Abhidharma is, it's the first attempt to arrange the Buddha's teachings into some kind of curriculum, a comprehensive philosophical system. In Tibetan Buddhism, they call it the repository of higher knowledge. They always refer to them as higher knowledge, training in wisdom kind of a thing. But it seems clear that the Abhidharma was not an original work, and it didn't appear till hundreds of years after the Buddha. In the beginning, different traditions were often recognized by their specific Abhidharmas. So different groups had really different Abhidharmas. So those are our three baskets of the Buddhist canon. There are three different Buddhist canons in the modern world. There's the Pali, which was written in Pali, and then there's the Chinese and Tibetan canons. The Chinese and Tibetan canons are Sanskrit-based and also include the Mahayana Sutras, whereas the Pali canon is written in Pali and predominantly known as the works of the Theravada school. The Buddhist canon was created in created a few hundred years after. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm misreading this. The Buddhist canon was created at the first Buddhist council shortly after the Buddha's death. So upon the Buddha passing away, it became obvious that from his students that they needed to somehow preserve the Buddhist teachings. At this time, they didn't really have writing, and so they were memorized and preserved through chanting, and all the different schools would take turns chanting different types of sutras. But at some point, they all gathered to figure out what's authentic and what is not. So that's the first Buddhist council. And so this is the birth of the Buddhist canon, or the Tripitaka. And of course, they're not written down till hundreds of years later, some 500 years after the Buddha's death. They're first written down in the 1st century, and they're written down during the 4th Buddhist council. So, but between the time of the 1st Buddhist council and the 4th, the what's called the Nikaya or Hinayana Buddhist tradition branched out into 18 distinct traditions or schools of thought, and each one of them having their own Tripitaka. So the history of the Tripitaka is quite interesting. In fact, there were many different amounts of baskets or collections within them. You had some Tripitakas that had 3, like today's modern Tripitaka, but there are also ones that had 5 or 7 different collections within those. And it just seemed like all the early schools, everybody had their own version. And many would say that it was at the time of the 3rd Buddhist council where the great Buddhist king, King Ashoka in India, he gathers all the different schools in India, the 18 different traditions, brings them together. They have a council and they try to decide once and for all what is going to be the authentic Buddhist canon. And one of the reasons they did it was because there seemed to be more and more discrepancy, and more monastics doing things that other monastics thought were inappropriate. Some things like touching money, allowing to receive money as donations, things like that. So King Ashoka, in a sense, sets the record straight, invites all the groups, and together they decide what the proper Buddhist canon is. At that time, the finished result, which is still being memorized and chanted for preservation, King Ashoka sends ambassadors out all over the world with the new canon, trying to spread it. And most importantly, he sends his son and daughter to Sri Lanka. And this is the birthplace of the modern Theravada school and the modern Pali canon. And so that's the exciting history about it all. But as secular Buddhists, we have to be open-minded and keep in mind a few things. And basically what I mean is that the validity of the Buddhist canons is definitely questionable. And in SBT, it's never my job to tell you what isn't and what isn't. My job is merely to share what I know with all of you so you can make up your own minds. We leave belief up to the individual. And so in this case, there's many different scholars that have different opinions. Of course, the major traditions believe that every word of their various canons, whether it's the Chinese, the Pali, or the Tibetan, they believe every single word within that it comes from the Buddha's mouth himself. The Chinese and the Tibetans believe all the Mahayana sutras were taught by the Buddha himself in secret. Even the tantric studies are believed to be that. So we have that on one end, on one side. And on the other side, we have a lot of scholars, modern scholars, who say clearly it's obvious that a lot of the sutras were not written, were written at a later time. Of course, the Mahayana is an easy one to cite. The Mahayana sutras were written hundreds of years after the Buddha's death, or they appear to be so. But then also in the Pali tradition. The Theravada, I think they like to see themselves as Puritans and holding the most accurate view of Buddhism in the world. But the fact is their own validity is in question. Even the Pali Sutras, it's clear that a lot of the things were added at a later time. A lot of what the Theravada practice are later commentarial additions added by great masters. And so what truly is authentically the Buddha's words and what is not is a tough question. And I think, we all know the work of Stephen Batchelor. He has really strong opinions on this. And I think he's a wonderful reference for us to work with. His work is quite wonderful. But even modern Theravada scholars, they also feel the same way. So I think to this day, for myself as a secular Buddhist, I find it quite questionable of just how valid these sources are, and to know what the Buddha actually spoke and what he didn't are in question. Also, our intention that we must know is another thing, that we have to know the answer, that we have to know which ones are, which ones aren't. I think in a more open way, looking at practice, we can view the scriptures and the sutras as in more of a sense of what works for us and what doesn't. What's obviously been working for traditions, one hasn't. And so I always kind of leave it at that. What's fruitful? What's illuminating? Those are the things that I take. Whether or not they were written by the Buddha or spoken by the Buddha himself, or by these great practitioners through the thousands of years of Buddhist history. Clearly, the Buddha isn't the only authority in Buddhism itself. They say that there's two authentic origins of Buddhism. One of them is in the Buddhist canon, what the Buddha is thought to have taught. But the other one is, what's authentic is what arises from authentic practice. And I think with SBT, we count on this quite a bit, and I do within my own practice. It's what I've discovered by doing authentic, proper Buddhist practices, those things that arise from those. And of course, the Buddha gives permission in this way. The Buddha, when he sends these ambassadors around the world in his day, he sent people out to teach his teachings. He gave clear instructions to teach in whatever way speaks to people. So it's, the Theravada tradition like to be literalists, where they really just, what's in the sutras is what they focus on, and later things that arise from practice aren't considered authentic. I think that's a mistake. Okay, I don't want to go on and on and on. But I'd like to say that out of the three baskets of the Buddhist canon, the first two are, I would say, are original collections, the Vinaya and the Sutra. So the Vinaya, again, I just call it discipline, and the Sutra is the words of the Buddha. Abhidharma, again, is clearly a later development. Also in this series, there's an aspect for me that's unique in the fact that I come from a commentarial tradition. So in the Buddhist world, we have two forms of traditions. We have the sutra-based, which is basically the Theravada school. And then we have commentarial traditions. And those commentarial traditions, their education is reliant on later masters. So in Tibetan Buddhism, our basic curriculum and understanding is based on the school of Nalanda in India from the 1st century to the 11th century. And so that's the major focus of of our Buddhist studies in Tibetan monasteries. Though we do have we have the Tibetan canon, the amount that we actually studied the sutras was so limited. It was more about these later great masters like Nagarjuna and Shantideva and Dharmakirti and Shantideva that clarified the Buddhist teachings and again put them in a more manageable curriculum. So in a sense, it's kind of our version of an Abhidharma, right? But the sutras can be kind of confusing. They often contradict themselves, and as many of you might know from reading them, they're not in a very comfortable arrangement for reading. They repeat themselves often, and simply it's because it lends itself better to chanting. You know, when you could repeat a dialogue and just change a little thing at the end, that's easy, like a song, right? But when it comes to reading them, I think most people think that the sutras are very uncomfortable to read. Some have tried to publish versions of the sutra with all the repetition and information that's not so pertinent out of it. I haven't come across a good text yet, but if anybody knows of one, I would be really interested in seeing that. So basically, in my belief system, I believe in the Buddhist canon as being the Vinaya and the Sutra, and Abhidharma is something that comes later. How about we take a second to take questions? We any questions? Or add some information that I might have missed. Was I incorrect about anything, or was I? Again, I come from the commentarial tradition, and sutras are not a big part of my expertise. So I'm looking forward to learning also in this program, as well as some of you. And but I have made it a goal of my life to read all the sutras. I've studied these various traditions in monasteries in their own countries throughout my travels. And so I've studied Theravada tradition while I was in Myanmar and Laos and Thailand and Sri Lanka. And I do have a pretty good understanding of them all. And I've studied at the monasteries of some of the texts that we're using for our study programs. So that's kind of exciting. But the Pali terminology kills me. I don't know how to read Pali, and I have great trouble pronouncing the sutras. So I hope you can all bear with me a little bit. Does anybody want to share anything? Who has experience in the sutras? Show of hands. Yeah, good. Okay, good. So then we're all going to learn from it, huh? It's going to be great. Okay, then I'm going to carry on a little bit. So then let's understand a little bit more of what the sutras are. So the term sutra, or sutta in Pali, basically means string or thread, but it could also mean rule, but that which weaves or holds together. So the idea is that the sutras are this thread throughout the Buddhist teachings that hold everything together. And it refers to this collection of texts and discourses of the historical Buddha and other masters. And with that said, let me put this back up. So here in the second, we have the Tripitaka at the top. Here in the middle, we have the sutras. Now, if we follow this line down, we have what are called the 5 collections or the 5 Nikayas. They also call them agamas in Sanskrit. So, and in English, they're usually understood as the long discourse, the middle-length discourse. This is kindred sayings, but that's not. I think we call that the numbered. I wonder if I have that on another sheet here. Oh, okay. We have the long discourses, the middle discourses, linked discourses, numbered discourses, and the minor discourses. Okay, with that said, the first four are predominantly the important ones. The last one is it's a collection of different texts, some old, some new, but it's kind of a catch-all for whatever they couldn't fit into the first four collections. And as you can see, let me see if I can move this up. If you can see, the Dhammapada itself is part of that collection. It's up here in the corner, right? And along with other things like the Jataka tales, which are very popular and known. The Jataka tales are interesting set of texts, and it shows us why this last collection is different, because the Jataka tales are often thought of not being authentic at all. A lot of the Jataka tales seem like they were imported from Hinduism and Jainism as well. So that's what we mean by it's a catch-all, and there's quite a few things there. So the sutra studies, of course, the best place to start is always the Dhammapada itself, which we're going to be doing. And then we'll go through and we're going to, after that, we're going to find the next most important sutras, and we're going to study those. So it's said that the Pali or the Nikaya Buddhist canon has over 10,000 sutras, and it's said that the Chinese and Tibetan canons have an additional 600 or more Mahayana sutras. And the reason why we don't have a clear answer is because they're still a little bit different. The Burmese Tripitaka, even though it's still Theravada, basically the same school, it's a little different than the Sri Lankan or the Thai version. And of course, the Tibetan canon has a bit different, has some different things in it than the Chinese. Now, with all of that said, I have to clarify the opposite. And the fact is that when we put the three Buddhist canons together, we lay them all on a table side by side and consider that they were kept for thousands of years through oral translation or oral preservation. It's amazing how similar they are. It's amazing that over, vast distances and thousands of years, that they're preserved in such a way that they're almost there's so little difference in them all. Did you ever play the game telephone when you were a kid, where you get in a big circle around a table and you whisper something in someone's ear and you watch it go around the table, and it's unrecognizable when you're done. I remember a Theravada monk said to me, and he said, thank God they did it. They preserved them orally. The best way to preserve anything. And all I thought about was the telephone game in my mind. I thought, I think I'd rather have it written down. But nevertheless, as much as we should be suspect and we should be cautious in having strong beliefs about what is and what isn't, the fact is, it's quite an amazing feat that they really share so much, that they're so much the same throughout all the different traditions. So this is something also that's cool in secular Buddhism, that in the past, traditions rarely shared with each other. And nowadays, in the 21st century, it's the first time that we have great scholars side by side are looking at all these various texts through all the different canons and traditions. And many of these scholars reading them in their own languages, right, the original languages, they're able to contrast and compare them. This is something that they've never been able to do in the past. So it's exciting to be a secular Buddhist now and be open to new findings, yeah? Okay, so that's some of the things that we're going to be bringing into our class. So I hope that that's really going to be exciting. Okay, what else do I want to talk about? Oh, maybe I'll put this up on the screen for you. I think this might be interesting. Um, for terminology, I just wanted everybody to be able to know a little bit. We're using a lot of these words, and when it comes to scriptural material in Buddhism, these are the general, these are the common terms for a lot of things. So, of course, we have the word text, which we just use as a general, non-specific term for Buddhist material. We have the sutras, which they're considered canonical texts, and again, the words of the Buddha and early great masters. Then we have the Nikayas or Agamas, and they're collections of texts that make up the Sutra Pitaka, the baskets. We then have Shastras, which are formal treatises or theses on specific topics in the sutras. I'll get back to that in 1 second. Then we have commentaries by later great masters explaining the scriptures. So the question is, well, what's the difference between a shastra and a commentary? And the shastras are just more formal treatises, and they're theses that are often not just by a single author, but they're a thesis that has been put forth and other people comment, almost becoming sutras in their own way. So the Shastra is kind of a modern version of a sutra written by more modern authors. And commentaries can be from the past or current. And then we have original works by later great masters. Original works don't have to necessarily be commentaries. A commentary is thoughts on some Buddhist texts, where original works, like a lot that we teach in SBT, can truly be original, where we have practices and thoughts that arise from it, and we can consider them valid because they arise authentically from authentic Buddhist practice, and the Buddha himself claims that. And then we have sadhanas, which are tantric practice texts, which we won't be getting into with that. Okay, and I can make that list available for everybody. I thought that was interesting. So we're going to start our Sutra Studies program with the greatest of all of the texts, the Dhammapada. So Dhammapada can be translated as verses of the Buddhadharma. It's a collection of sayings or the words of the Buddha in verse form, and is one of the most widely read and best known Buddhist scriptures. It was one of the very first books that I read in Buddhism, as well as probably many of you. I've been reading it for 30 years off and on. The original version of the Dhammapada is in the last of the Nikayas, the fifth Nikaya collection we talked about. The Dhammapada contains roughly, because not all the Dhammapadas are the same, but it's roughly 423 verses divided up into 26 chapters, which it is in the text we're using. So we're going to be covering its 26 chapters within 26 weeks. Now, that sounds like quite a feat, doesn't it? But you have to remember that each chapter is quite small. Each chapter is just a handful of verses. Some are larger than others, but the point is that during the week, everybody can do their homework and read up on it, and we can talk about the important aspects of them and try to get some clarity. And I think it's going to be great fun. So the class material, I decided on 3 texts, and currently Gil Fronsdal has the best or the most popular of the modern translations of the Dhammapada. And I wasn't that familiar with it at first. And after getting ready for this class and reading through it, I was just stunned with how wonderful it is. He's currently an American Buddhist teacher. I believe he was a Zen monk for a while, but he teaches also Vipassana, or the Theravada tradition, as well. And he's in California in Spirit Rock with Jack Kornfield and all those great teachers out there. And I was just really impressed by his work. So I decided to put that first and make that our primary text. So within the program, students don't have to compare the various texts. That's there for all you overachievers that really wanted to dig in. If you'd like to just follow that primary text, and of course all of the texts have the same name, they're all the Dhammapada, but Gil Fronsdale's text, that's certainly enough. And if there's discrepancies, we'll talk about them in class. But the other ones are there if you'd like. The second text is by the Acharya Buddha and I spent a considerable amount of time at Buddha Rakita's group, his monastery, it was in Bangalore, India. So I had many visits there and many great friends there, and I did study this text while I was there briefly. And Buddha Rakita is one of the great modern scholars. I didn't have a chance to meet him. He passed away about a year before I went to the monastery, but nevertheless, just a brilliant Tibetan master. And I think his work on the Dhammapada is truly illuminating. And then thirdly, for the sake of comparison, I thought we would do an obscure text by the 19th century Tibetan scholar Gedin Shipel. And just because it's a really different account of the Dhammapada. So he translated it from Pali into Tibetan, and then a Tibetan translation group translates it into English. But if you'd like to do a Google search and read about Gedin Shipel, he's quite a character in Tibetan history. At the time, he was kind of a bad boy, and he ends up in prison, and no one likes him in Tibet. But then later, people can't help but notice his brilliance, and he becomes a beloved figure. So it's kind of funny how he from a bad boy, he becomes this really beloved figure. In fact, the Dalai Lama's translator spends all his time translating Gedin Shipel's books. So a short story that he leaves. He's in Tibet, and he's just the greatest of all scholars. Everybody's just unbelievably impressed with him. But he wants more, and he goes to India with the idea of retrieving some original Buddhist manuscripts, and he's going to go there and come back. He decides to stay because he's having way too much fun, and in his stories are quite funny. He recollects first seeing people wearing pants. He never saw pants before, and he talked about how ugly they were and what a hideous sight watching people wear these pants all over the place. And but he kind of, from a monk, he kind of turns a different way, and he gives up his robes, and he becomes a drinker and visiting brothels, and he wants to experience the way the world is. At some point, he returns to Tibet, writing more. He had a lot of negative things to say about the monasteries and the government, and so they ended up putting him in prison, where he inevitably dies. But his work later is just heralded as some of those most brilliant Tibetan literature. So a really interesting character to read about. And again, I think his translation is really insightful. So we're going to be using Gil Fronsdale's text for our main, and then the other ones are there just for reading purposes. If we have any kind of discrepancies on what something means, we can look to the others. So it's up to you for how much you'd like to participate or not. So next week, we're going to start with that. Next week, we're going to start with chapter 1. And I'm sorry. Next week, we're going to start with chapter 1 of Gil Fransdale's Dhammapada. And we'll get some of our instructors to read them here. And then we'll just talk about them. But it's all going to be done in a friendly, open way. And we're all going to help each other and learn a little bit about it. And I hope I can bring some insight into the teachings myself. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yeah, Jennifer.
I've noticed that several people have the book. Is that the Gil Fransdale's text?
I believe people have been showing that, yeah. So
Where
you can
you guys get it from, like Amazon? Okay.
The link's on the website.
It is. Okay, thank you.
On our website. So we have the link to buy it from Amazon. We also have a link to borrow the text, digital version, for free. So we have all 3 texts for free on the website. And the whatever it is, the global library or whatever they call themselves, they do this thing of lending books, and you can actually borrow it. And then Gaten Chippell's book was sold out, and there's no other ways to get it. We usually would never publish or post a copyrighted text, but in this case, we don't have a choice. And copyrights usually allow using of books for research, kind of the same idea of how a library works. But I do, if it does become available, it'll be lovely if you did pay for it, yeah. But they're all there. Lisa says, audio on YouTube, I think. Oh, very nice, yeah, I think so. And I think there's a website set up where I think he actually reads them one by one. Yeah, I think it's called Fair Use for Teaching Purposes. Oh, yeah, that's right. So super exciting, isn't it? You guys ready, huh? Oh, lovely, lovely. So you can go to our website, sbtonline.org. All the material is there. You can find the Sutra program in the programs tab, and it has a little bit to say there and tell you about the program. And I think that's about it. Anybody else have any questions? I'm hoping we don't have any Pali experts here that are going to wag their finger at me every class. You know, I got my Sanskrit, my Tibetan, and my English for terminology. It seems like there's just no more room in my brain for one more. But for whatever reason, I cannot remember Pali terminology or the names of my friends in the Theravada tradition. It's a beautiful language. Yeah. Well, I'm super excited about it. Yeah. Okay. Darcy, do you have a question? Thumbs up. Okay, good. Catherine, are you okay? Okay, good. Yeah. And I think it's just going to be a blast. So I think the 26 weeks will fly right by. Then we'll pick another text after that. So the point is the sutra studies are just starting tonight, and they're just not stopping. We'll just do them every Saturday. Catherine?
So is the homework to read the chapter before we come next week? Is that what we
chapter 1. Yeah. You read the chapter for the week, and I'll post on our social media what reading there is to do each time. So this time it's chapter 1, and whether you read the one text or you want to read the 3, it's up to you. You'll find it's very short. It's an easy reading assignment. But you can find things online of people explaining them and bringing insight into it. So it's exciting nowadays with technology. We have a lot of choices. Okay, I'd like to also remind everybody that tomorrow's our 3rd week of our 10-week meditation program. We have class. We're going to be meditating in the 4 positions, including walking meditation. It's going to be a great class. So I'm excited. We got a lot of stuff happening. Feels like the Sangha's vibrant, and alive these days, which is always a lovely, lovely thing. Please remember, I'm just a click away for anybody that needs help with anything. Yeah, we're a hands-on Sangha. And please join us in our daily meditations each day, huh? Yeah, they're open to everybody. And with that said, why don't we end today's class with our altruistic affirmation? May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well. May all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is a source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thanks for joining me, friends. See you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Tarpa.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Great
Thank you,
turnout.
Papa.
Yeah, anytime.